A black woman is accused of stealing in a luxury boutique simply because of the color of her skin. But no one knows she is the new CEO of the entire chain. She decides to root out discrimination within the company. But her fight for justice faces strong resistance from within. Will her determination and courage be enough to change the entrenched system? Subscribe to find out how it all ends. Amanda Brown, a distinguished black woman in her early 40s, had spent years climbing the corporate ladder in the competitive world of retail. With a reputation for being a no-nonsense, highly competent leader, she had recently been appointed the new CEO of a prestigious luxury clothing store chain. Her first major decision in her new role was to conduct unannounced visits to various branches to assess their customer service and internal operations. On a chilly Thursday afternoon, Amanda decided to visit one of the most prominent stores in the chain, located in the heart of a bustling, upscale shopping district. She chose to dress modestly in a simple, well-tailored suit and minimal makeup, intending to blend in and observe without drawing attention. As she stepped into the store, she was immediately struck by the contrast between the store's opulence and her understated appearance. The store exuded luxury from every corner. Soft, ambient music played in the background, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume. The walls were lined with designer clothes, sparkling jewelry, and the latest in high-end accessories. Wealthy patrons strolled through the aisles, glancing over items with practiced ease. Amanda moved quietly, her eyes scanning the store, her professional instinct catching every detail. But her entrance did not go unnoticed. A young sales associate named Linda, who had been chatting with another employee near the front, caught sight of Amanda and immediately felt a surge of unease. "Who's she?" Linda whispered to her colleague, a slight edge of suspicion in her voice. "I don't recognize her, and she doesn't look like our usual clientele." Amanda made her way toward a display of designer handbags, examining them thoughtfully. She was unaware that Linda had already formed an opinion about her. Linda, convinced that something was off, approached George, the store's head of security. "Hey, George," she said, her voice low. "You see that woman over there? I think we might have a problem. She's acting suspicious." George, a middle-aged man with a burly build and a stern expression, looked over at Amanda. His eyes narrowed. In his years of working security, he had seen all kinds of people come and go, but his biases had often led him to make quick judgments. "I'll keep an eye on her," he muttered, moving toward Amanda. Amanda, meanwhile, continued to browse, unaware of the attention she was drawing. She picked up a handbag, feeling its fine leather and noting the craftsmanship. She turned to see George standing a few feet away, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt intrusive. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, but his tone suggested anything but helpfulness. There was an underlying edge, a suspicion that permeated his words. Amanda looked up, sensing the tension. "No, thank you," she replied calmly, putting the handbag back on the display. "I'm just browsing." George didn't move. "Are you sure? Because we've had some issues lately with, certain types of people," he continued, his gaze narrowing. Amanda's brows furrowed. She was beginning to understand what this was. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. She turned to move away, but George stepped closer. "I'm going to have to ask you to show me your bag, ma'am," he said, his tone more insistent now. "We've had a few thefts recently, and I need to make sure everything is in order." Amanda took a deep breath. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled. "I haven't done anything to warrant such a request." At this moment, Linda joined them, her face a mask of condescending concern. "Look, we don't want any trouble," she said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "But we've had issues with theft, and we need to be cautious. We just want to make sure everything is okay." Around them, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Other customers started to take notice, their whispers growing louder. Some of them began to pull out their phones, sensing a scene. A middle-aged woman in pearls muttered to her friend, "I knew something was off the moment I saw her. She doesn't belong here." Amanda's patience was wearing thin. She looked around at the growing crowd and then back at George. "If you have a genuine reason to suspect me of something, then call the police," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "Otherwise, I suggest you let me continue shopping in peace." George's expression hardened. "Fine," he snapped. "We'll let them sort this out." He turned and spoke into his walkie-talkie, calling for immediate police backup. The tension in the store reached a boiling point as customers continued to murmur and speculate. Amanda stood her ground, her heart pounding but her face calm. She knew what this was, a blatant act of discrimination. She had faced it many times in her career, but each time, it stung just as much. She could see the looks of judgment, the preconceived notions reflected in the eyes of those around her. But she wasn't going to back down. A few minutes later, 2 police officers entered the store with purpose, scanning the crowd until they saw George, who waved them over. They walked up to Amanda, their expressions serious. "Ma'am, we've been called here because of a report of suspicious behavior," one of the officers said. "We need you to step aside and answer a few questions." Amanda's eyes met the officer's. She could see it in his gaze, the same judgment, the same lack of belief in her innocence. "I would like to know what grounds you have for this," she stated, her voice unwavering. The officer didn't bother to hide his irritation. "Just step aside, ma'am," he repeated more firmly. "We're trying to handle this as smoothly as possible." Before she could protest further, the officer grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the display. "Hey!" she exclaimed, pulling back, her composure starting to crack under the weight of the unfolding scene. "You have no right." The second officer moved to support his partner, taking a firmer grip on Amanda's other arm. "Listen, lady," he said with a sneer. "You need to know your place. We don't need any trouble from someone like you." The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Amanda could feel the weight of their stares, the condemnation without cause. She knew she had to stay calm, had to control her anger. She took a deep breath and said, "I need to make a call. I have the right to call my lawyer." The officers hesitated, but finally allowed her to take out her phone. She dialed a number, her hand steady despite the situation. As the line connected, she spoke clearly and calmly. "It's Amanda. I need you here, now." The next few minutes were tense, with Amanda standing silently between the 2 officers, surrounded by a sea of skeptical faces. She could feel the distrust, the preconceived narratives already forming in the minds of the onlookers. She heard snippets of their conversations. She probably did something. They wouldn't stop her for no reason. She should just cooperate. Then, a man in a sharp suit entered the store, flanked by 2 assistants. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. He moved with authority, his eyes scanning the scene until he spotted Amanda. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. The officers looked at him, momentarily confused. "Who are you?" one of them asked, his tone challenging. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, flashing it with a practiced motion. "I'm her lawyer," he said, his voice icy. "And I suggest you release her immediately, or we'll have a lawsuit on our hands that this city will not soon forget." The crowd fell silent. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in for everyone involved. George's face went pale as he began to understand the gravity of his mistake. The 2 officers loosened their grip on Amanda, stepping back. Amanda looked around, her eyes sweeping over the faces of the bystanders, the staff, and the police. "I told you," she said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "You've made a serious mistake today." The realization spread like wildfire through the store. The accusations, the prejudice, the unfounded suspicions, they had all been based on a lie, on preconceived notions. And now, everyone involved would have to face the consequences. The silence that followed the lawyer's stern words hung heavily in the air. The two police officers, clearly thrown off by the sudden turn of events, exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't expecting this. A high-profile lawyer, arriving in the middle of what they thought would be a simple case of shoplifting. Around them, the atmosphere buzzed with tension as the store's patrons and staff watched with bated breath, sensing that the situation was spiraling out of control. The lead officer, a stocky man with a square jaw, tightened his grip on his belt and stepped forward. "Look," he said, trying to regain his composure. "We were called here for a reason. We've got a report of suspicious behavior, and we have to investigate. That's our job." Amanda, still standing tall and composed despite the degrading treatment she had just endured, looked the officer in the eye. "Suspicious behavior?" she repeated, her voice calm but edged with incredulity. "You mean shopping while black?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. The truth of Amanda's words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the pretense of the officer's authority. Several customers averted their eyes, uncomfortable with their own roles as spectators to this unfolding drama. The lawyer, clearly prepared to escalate matters if necessary, didn't miss a beat. "Officers, I suggest you take a moment to consider the situation very carefully," he said, his voice level but commanding. "You've detained my client without cause, publicly humiliated her, and now you're about to find yourselves on the wrong end of a civil rights lawsuit." The second officer, younger and visibly more nervous, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "We're just doing our job," he muttered, his bravado fading. He wasn't expecting to be challenged like this, and certainly not in front of so many witnesses. "Your job," the lawyer cut in sharply, "is to protect and serve, not to profile and harass." At this, the crowd began to murmur more loudly. Some were clearly on Amanda's side now, seeing the injustice of the situation. A middle-aged woman in a designer coat, who had previously looked on with disdain, now seemed to reconsider. "Maybe she's right," she whispered to her companion. "This feels wrong." Still, George, the store's head of security, wasn't ready to let go of his control over the situation. His face reddened with anger and embarrassment. He stepped forward. "I'm not letting this go," he spat, directing his words at Amanda and her lawyer. "We had legitimate reasons to be concerned. We've had thefts here before, and she fit the what?" Amanda's voice cut through his tirade, cold and clear. "Fit the profile? A black woman in your store is automatically a suspect." The weight of her words pressed down on everyone present. George's face twitched with frustration, his stance becoming defensive. He wasn't prepared for this kind of confrontation, certainly not in front of a growing audience of onlookers. "Look," he blurted out, "you people always think. You people." Amanda's lawyer seized on the phrase, his voice rising with intensity. "What exactly do you mean by you people? Do you even hear yourself?" For a moment, the entire store seemed to hold its breath. George's mouth opened and closed, as if he were trying to form a coherent response, but the weight of his own prejudices was laid bare for all to see. The tension in the room became almost unbearable, like a taut wire ready to snap. One of the police officers, sensing the situation was getting dangerously close to exploding, finally relented. Okay, he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Let's calm down. There's been a misunderstanding. We're going to step back and let everyone cool off." But Amanda's lawyer wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it, when you accost an innocent woman and accuse her of a crime without any evidence, when you publicly humiliate her because of her race? The officers visibly bristled. The older one's jaw tightened as he tried to hold onto the last shreds of his authority. Look, we'll file a report. And if there's a complaint, you can take it up with our department, he said. His voice was firm, but there was an underlying note of uncertainty, a sign that he knew how badly this had gone for them. Amanda, meanwhile, remained calm but resolute. "Oh, I will," she replied, her eyes locking onto his. "And trust me, this won't just be a complaint. This will be a case." The officers exchanged another look. They knew they were in over their heads, and the best thing to do now was to retreat. "Let's go," the younger officer muttered, nudging his partner. The two officers turned and left, their departure accompanied by a murmur of discontent from the crowd. As the officers exited, the atmosphere in the store shifted again, this time to a quieter, more reflective tension. The realization of what had just transpired was settling in for everyone. The security guard, George, now looked visibly shaken, his earlier bravado gone. Linda, the sales associate who had first raised the alarm, stood frozen, her face pale. "Everyone here today has witnessed what happened," Amanda's lawyer declared to the room, his voice loud enough to carry. "And I hope you all understand the gravity of it. This is not just about an accusation. This is about systemic prejudice and abuse of power." Some nodded in agreement, while others looked away, clearly uncomfortable. A few even began to shuffle toward the exit, no longer eager to be part of this spectacle. The crowd was slowly dispersing, but the damage was done. The reputations of the store staff and the police were now under scrutiny. Amanda took a deep breath. She had remained composed throughout the ordeal, but the weight of it all was starting to press down on her. She turned to her lawyer. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said quietly. He nodded, his expression softening. "I'm just glad you called me before things got any worse," he replied. "But this isn't over, Amanda. Not by a long shot." She nodded, knowing he was right. "We need to make sure there are consequences for this," she said firmly. "Not just for me, but for anyone who has faced this kind of discrimination." As the lawyer began speaking with a few remaining bystanders to gather more witness statements, Amanda felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a woman who had earlier been one of the skeptical onlookers, now standing with an apologetic look on her face. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," the woman stammered. "I didn't realize. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions." Amanda nodded, her expression softening just a bit. "It's okay," she said, though her voice was tinged with exhaustion. "But this is why it's so important to challenge these assumptions. Because they hurt people. They damage lives." The woman nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." As the woman walked away, Amanda stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The day had taken a turn she hadn't fully anticipated, but she knew it was a stark reminder of the work that still needed to be done. Suddenly, George, the security guard, approached cautiously. His earlier arrogance had completely dissipated, replaced by a nervous energy. "Miss Brown, I didn't know," he began, his voice shaky. If I had known you were," Amanda cut him off. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently," she said, her voice steely. "But you didn't. And that's the problem, isn't it?" George swallowed hard, clearly at a loss for words. Amanda continued. "You made assumptions about me because of how I look, and those assumptions could have had serious consequences." I'm sorry," he stammered, looking down. "You need to think long and hard about how you do your job," Amanda said, her tone firm. "Because today, you didn't just misjudge a customer. You exposed the kind of prejudice that has no place in any business. With that, She turned away from him and headed toward the exit, her lawyer falling in step beside her. The store's management, who had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines, now hurried over, desperate to make amends. "Miss Brown, please," one of the managers, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, called out. "We are deeply sorry for what happened here today. This is not how we want our stores to operate." Amanda stopped and turned to face him. "Then prove it," she said sharply. "I want a full investigation into this store's practices. I want every employee trained on discrimination and bias, and I want reports on how you're going to prevent this from happening again." The manager nodded rapidly, eager to appease. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." Amanda nodded. "Good," she said, "because today was a wake-up call. For all of you." She walked out of the store, leaving behind a room full of people who were now grappling with the reality of their own biases. For Amanda, this was just the beginning. She knew she had a long fight ahead, but she was ready for it. The air outside the boutique was cool, and Amanda took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could still feel the tension of the confrontation coursing through her veins. Her lawyer, Robert, walked beside her, his expression a mix of concern and determination. As they moved away from the entrance, the whispers and stares of the onlookers still lingered behind them, a reminder that this battle was far from over. "Amanda," Robert said, breaking the silence, "we need to talk about our next steps. This can't just end with a verbal apology or a minor disciplinary action." Amanda nodded, her face set in a resolute expression. "I agree. This isn't the first time I've faced something like this, but it's certainly going to be the last time I let it slide without consequences." She stopped and turned to face him, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and determination. "I want a full investigation, not just of this store, but of every single one in the chain." Robert nodded. "Absolutely. We'll need to gather all the evidence, witness statements, security footage, anything that shows the sequence of events. And we'll also look into their internal policies and how they handle these situations. If this is happening here, it's probably happening elsewhere too." As they spoke, a man dressed in a sharp suit approached them. His face was pale, and there was a nervous tremor in his voice. "Miss Brown," he began, his hands slightly trembling. "I'm Marcus Davenport, the regional manager. I've just been informed about what happened inside. Please accept our deepest apologies on behalf of the company." Amanda eyed him carefully. She could tell he was desperate to contain the situation before it exploded into a full-blown scandal. "Your apologies won't be enough, Mr. Davenport," she said calmly. "I want immediate action. We're going to conduct a thorough review of the store's practices and policies. Every employee is going to be evaluated. Anyone found guilty of discriminatory practices will face consequences." Davenport nodded quickly. "Of course, Miss Brown. I'll make sure everything is handled promptly. I'll personally oversee it if necessary." Amanda's gaze didn't waver. "Good," she replied, "because this isn't just about one store. This is about systemic issues that need to be addressed. I expect full cooperation from you and your staff." Davenport nodded again, sweat beading on his forehead. "Understood," he said, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "I'll get started right away." As he hurried away, Robert turned to Amanda. "He's going to scramble to protect himself and the company's image," he said. "We need to move quickly and make sure they don't sweep this under the rug." Amanda agreed. "Let's start by reviewing the security footage from today. If there's one thing I've learned in this business, it's that the truth is always in the details." They headed back to Amanda's office, where they could begin laying out their strategy. As they walked, Robert called a team of investigators to start gathering evidence. Amanda, meanwhile, contacted her assistant to arrange meetings with other high-level executives in the company. She was going to make it clear that the events of today were unacceptable and that a new era of accountability was beginning. Back at the office, Amanda sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. She had already sent out a memo to all the store managers, informing them of an immediate investigation into the practices of every branch. She wanted to leave no room for ambiguity. Any act of discrimination would be met with swift and decisive action. A few hours later, Amanda and Robert were joined by a team of legal experts and human resources professionals. The conference room buzzed with activity as they reviewed footage from the boutique, examined employee records, and strategized on how to handle the inevitable fallout. Every screen displayed some aspect of the case: video evidence, testimonies, and policy documents. The security footage clearly showed how Linda, the sales associate, had spotted Amanda and immediately flagged her as suspicious. It showed George, the head of security, approaching her without cause, his aggressive posture and demeanor on full display. The police arriving, their forceful handling of Amanda, and the crowd's reactions, all of it was laid bare. "This is worse than I thought," Robert said, shaking his head as he watched the footage. "It's clear as day. They targeted you the moment you walked in." Amanda's face was stoic as she watched the events unfold from a different perspective. "And this is just one store," she said quietly. "How many others have faced this kind of treatment and didn't have the resources or the voice to fight back?" One of the legal advisors, a woman named Rachel, chimed in. "We need to make sure we're handling this correctly. We have to frame this as a systemic issue, not just an isolated incident. That way, we can push for comprehensive changes across the entire chain." Amanda nodded. "Agreed. But we also need to ensure that those directly responsible are held accountable. George, Linda, and the officers, they all need to face consequences. We can't let this slide." As they continued to strategize, Amanda's phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Marcus Davenport, the regional manager. He had sent her a report summarizing the immediate steps he was taking in response to the incident. Amanda opened the document and quickly scanned through it. She could tell that Davenport was trying to cover his tracks, framing the situation as a misunderstanding rather than an act of blatant discrimination. Amanda looked up from her phone, her expression hardening. "We're not going to let them spin this," she said firmly. "We need to keep the pressure on." Robert nodded. "Absolutely. I'll start drafting a public statement, and we'll coordinate with PR to make sure our message is clear. We're not backing down." The next morning, Amanda called for a meeting with the company's senior executives. She wanted to make it clear that changes were coming, and they needed to get on board or get out of the way. The boardroom was filled with tension as the executives gathered, some clearly uncomfortable with the prospect of an internal shakeup. Amanda stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding. She wasted no time getting to the point. "Yesterday's incident was not just a public relations nightmare. It was a failure of our company's values," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "And it exposed a deep-rooted problem that we need to address immediately." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a man named Richard Cole, spoke up. "Miss Brown, with all due respect, I think we're overreacting here. It was one incident, and the staff involved have already been reprimanded." Amanda cut him off, her eyes blazing. "This is not an overreaction, Richard. This is an awakening. Our brand represents luxury and exclusivity, but it must also represent integrity and inclusivity. If we cannot guarantee that, then we have no business claiming to serve our diverse clientele." Another executive, a woman named Elena Martinez, nodded in agreement. "Amanda is right. If we don't address this head-on, we risk alienating not just our customers, but also our investors and partners. This isn't just a matter of public perception. It's a matter of doing what's right." Richard, sensing the shifting mood in the room, relented. "Fine. What do you propose we do?" Amanda laid out her plan. "First, we are launching a company-wide audit of all our stores and their staff. We will review hiring practices, employee training, and customer service policies. We're also going to mandate comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for every employee, from top to bottom. Another executive raised a hand. And the legal implications, he asked. If this goes public, it could lead to lawsuits, settlements. It could get very messy. Robert, who was seated beside Amanda, responded. We're prepared for that. In fact, we welcome it. If it takes legal action to hold people accountable and drive real change, then that's what we'll do. Amanda nodded in agreement. This isn't just about avoiding liability. It's about setting a new standard, and that starts with us. If any of you feel uncomfortable with that direction, I understand. But know this, I'm not asking for permission. I'm taking action. The room fell silent. Amanda's words hung in the air, a clear challenge to anyone who dared oppose her. One by one, the executives nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation and the necessity for change. Later that day, as Amanda returned to her office, she felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind, but she knew it was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed with notifications from news outlets picking up the story, and her email inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, some critical, but all reflecting the impact of her actions. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, ready to continue the fight. She knew she couldn't let up. Not for a moment. The eyes of her employees, her customers, and the public were all on her now, waiting to see what would happen next. Amanda took a deep breath and began typing. She drafted a detailed internal memo outlining the new policies and expectations for every employee in the company. She made it clear that there would be zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind, and that she expected every store manager to uphold these values, or face the consequences. As she finished the memo, she paused, reflecting on the gravity of her decision. This wasn't just about today's incident. It was about a lifetime of experiences that had brought her to this point. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome or unworthy because of their skin color. And she wasn't going to stop until real change was achieved. The morning light filtered through the large windows of Amanda's office, casting long shadows across the room. She had been awake since dawn, her mind already whirring with plans for the day ahead. Today marked the official start of the internal investigation, and Amanda was determined to leave no stone unturned. The investigative team, a mix of legal experts, human resources professionals, and third-party consultants specializing in corporate ethics, had already begun arriving. The conference room buzzed with activity as they set up laptops, reviewed documents, and prepared for what would undoubtedly be a long and grueling process. Amanda entered the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her tone serious and direct. "Thank you all for being here. We have a lot of work to do, and it starts now. Today we're going to look into every aspect of our store's operations, hiring practices, training programs, customer service protocols. We will scrutinize everything to ensure there is no room for discrimination or prejudice in this company." Robert, her lawyer, nodded in agreement. "We're also focusing on identifying individuals who have perpetuated any discriminatory behavior. Our goal is not just to address the symptoms, but to root out the causes." Rachel, one of the legal advisors, raised her hand. "We should start by reviewing the security footage and employee records for any patterns of misconduct. If what happened to Amanda is happening elsewhere, we need to know." Amanda nodded. "Absolutely. Let's get started." The first few hours were intense. The team meticulously combed through footage from the boutique, rewatching the incident multiple times to ensure they captured every detail. It was painful for Amanda to relive those moments, but she knew it was necessary. They also began examining records from other stores, cross-referencing them with customer complaints and employee performance reviews. It wasn't long before a troubling pattern began to emerge. At several locations, there were documented instances where black customers had been closely monitored, questioned, or even asked to leave without cause. In one case, a black woman had been accused of shoplifting after picking up an expensive dress. Despite the fact that she was a well-known local artist and a regular customer. These records are damning, Rachel said, her brow furrowed as she flipped through a stack of reports. It's clear that there's a culture of suspicion toward black customers across multiple stores. And it's not just the boutique where Amanda was targeted. Amanda's jaw tightened as she listened. We need to document all of this and prepare it for presentation to the board. If we're going to make real change, we need everyone to see the extent of the problem. Robert nodded. And we should also speak directly with the employees involved in these incidents. If there's any hope of rehabilitating this company's culture, we need to understand where these attitudes are coming from. The team decided to start with George, the head of security from the boutique where the incident occurred. He had been temporarily suspended pending the investigation, and now he sat nervously in the small, sterile interview room set up in the corporate office. Amanda and Robert entered, their expressions unreadable. "Good morning, George," Amanda said as she took a seat across from him. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Thank you for coming in today." George shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face was drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Yeah, of course," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Look, I just want to say, I'm really sorry for what happened." Amanda studied him for a moment. "I'm sure you are," she replied, her tone neutral. "But we're not here just to hear apologies. We want to understand why you acted the way you did. Why did you assume I was a threat the moment I walked into that store?" George glanced at Robert, who was silently watching him, then back at Amanda. "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess I've seen things go missing before. And when I saw you, I thought..." "Thought what?" Amanda pressed. "That because I'm black, I must be there to steal?" George flinched at the bluntness of her words. "I didn't mean it like that." "But that's exactly what you did," Amanda interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You saw me, and you immediately made a judgment based on my skin color. And I want to know why." George's shoulders slumped. "I guess it's just, I've been in security for a long time. You get used to looking for certain things, certain behaviors. And those behaviors include simply existing while black," Robert cut in, his voice sharp. "Because that's what this boils down to, George. You profiled Amanda, and it's not just about you. It's about the culture that allowed this to happen." George fell silent, clearly struggling to find the right words. Amanda leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not looking for excuses, George. I'm looking for honesty. If we're going to fix this, we need to know where the rot starts." After a long pause, George sighed deeply. "I guess it's just how I was taught," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been told to be cautious, to watch out for anyone who looks like they don't belong. I didn't mean for it to be about race, but I guess it was." Amanda nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. "But understand this. What happened that day was unacceptable. And it's not just about you. It's about a system that has allowed this kind of thinking to go unchallenged for too long." George nodded, his face flushed with shame. "I get it," he murmured. "I really do." Amanda stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "We'll be in touch with our decision," she said. "But I want you to think long and hard about what you've done and how you can change moving forward." As she and Robert left the room, Amanda felt a mix of anger and determination. George's words, while honest, were a stark reminder of the deep-seated biases that still existed within the company and society at large. Next, they interviewed Linda, the sales associate, who had first flagged Amanda as suspicious. Unlike George, Linda came in with a defensive attitude, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't see why I'm here," Linda snapped as she sat down. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Amanda asked, her eyebrows raised. "Your job is to provide excellent customer service to everyone who walks through those doors. But you decided to treat me like a criminal the moment you saw me. Why?" Linda rolled her eyes. "Because you were acting weird," she retorted. "You weren't like our usual customers." "And what exactly does that mean?" Robert interjected. "That she didn't fit into your idea of who should be shopping in that store," Linda huffed. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. I just—" "Yes, you did," Amanda interrupted, her voice cold. "You saw a black woman in a luxury store, and you decided I didn't belong. That's not doing your job, Linda. That's discrimination." Linda's face flushed with anger. "I don't see how it's discrimination if I'm just trying to protect the store." Amanda shook her head. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "You think protecting the store means targeting people who don't look like you. That's not acceptable, and it's going to change." The conversation with Linda was tense and uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Amanda and Robert knew that this kind of mentality was pervasive and would require serious retraining and accountability measures to dismantle. The investigation continued over the next several days, with similar conversations happening across multiple stores. Amanda insisted on being present for as many interviews as possible, wanting to see for herself how deep the issues ran. She was both angered and saddened by the frequency of similar incidents. It was clear that this wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a systemic problem. With the evidence they gathered, Amanda and her team compiled a comprehensive report detailing the findings. The document was exhaustive, filled with examples of discriminatory practices, employee testimonies, and a scathing critique of the company's current policies. "Now," Amanda said, as she reviewed the final draft of the report, "it's time to present this to the board. They need to understand that this is not just a PR issue. This is a fundamental failure of leadership and culture." Rachel nodded. "And we should be prepared for pushback. Some people aren't going to like what they see here." Robert smirked. "Good. Let them push back. It'll only prove how much needs to change." Amanda agreed. "We're not going to let them sweep this under the rug. We're going to hold everyone accountable from the top down." As she prepared to present the report to the board, Amanda felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. She knew there would be resistance, but she was ready to face it head-on. The next chapter in her fight for justice was about to begin. Amanda had faced many challenges in her career, but she had never seen the stakes this high. The comprehensive report detailing the discriminatory practices within the company was damning, and it was ready to be presented to the board. The report wasn't just about the single incident that happened to her. It exposed a systemic culture of bias that needed to be rooted out. As she prepared for the meeting, Amanda knew she was about to face significant opposition. Not everyone would be on board with the changes she intended to implement, and some would do anything to stop her. The boardroom was filled with a tense, almost electric atmosphere as the company's senior executives and board members took their seats. Some were nervously flipping through the printed copies of the report. Others were whispering to one another, clearly unsettled by the gravity of the situation. Amanda sat at the head of the table, her face calm but her eyes sharp, scanning the room. The CEO, William Hartley, an older white man with a stern expression and a reputation for being tough but fair, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "As you are all aware, we have a serious matter to discuss today. Miss Amanda Brown has conducted an internal investigation into the recent incident at one of our stores and will be presenting her findings. Amanda, the floor is yours." Amanda stood, her presence commanding. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. She could sense the tension, the resistance simmering beneath the surface. She knew some of them were ready to dismiss her, to downplay the report as an overreaction, but she was prepared. "Thank you, William," Amanda began. "What happened to me at the boutique wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger problem that runs through our entire organization. This report," she continued, holding up a copy, "details multiple instances of racial profiling, discriminatory practices, and a toxic culture that has been allowed to fester, unchallenged, for far too long." She clicked a button on a remote, and a large screen behind her came to life, displaying key excerpts from the report, video footage, graphs of complaint statistics, and direct quotes from both employees and customers. "As you can see," she continued, "the evidence is undeniable. We have a culture problem, a big one, and it's affecting not only our customers but also our reputation and, ultimately, our bottom line." Richard Cole, one of the most senior members of the board and a longtime friend of William Hartley, leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Amanda, no one here is saying that discrimination is acceptable," he began, his tone patronizing. "But isn't this a bit excessive? I mean, we're talking about a few bad incidents, not a systemic issue." Amanda anticipated this line of questioning. "Richard, with all due respect," she replied firmly, "this isn't just a few incidents. We've identified a pattern of behavior across multiple locations, spanning years. If we don't address this now, we're sending a message to our employees and customers that we condone this behavior." Elena Martinez, another board member who had been supportive of Amanda's actions from the beginning, spoke up. "I've gone through the report myself, and it's clear that we have a serious issue on our hands. If we don't act, we risk losing not only our credibility, but also our most valuable customers and partners." I think Amanda is right. We need to take immediate action. The room grew more divided. Amanda could see the lines being drawn, those who supported her and those who were looking for any excuse to maintain the status quo. The discussion grew heated, with some board members openly challenging the findings, while others voiced their concern about potential lawsuits and negative publicity. William Hartley finally raised his hand to call for silence. "Enough," he said. "We're not going to solve this by shouting at each other. Amanda, you've made a compelling case. But what exactly do you propose we do? Because this isn't just about words. It's about real changes that could impact our entire company structure." Amanda nodded. "I'm glad you asked, William. I propose a multi-step plan. First, a company-wide audit of all stores to assess their customer service and hiring practices, focusing on identifying any further incidents of discrimination. Second, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for every employee, from the top down. Third, we establish a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences for those who violate it." Richard scoffed. "And how much is all this going to cost us?" Amanda didn't miss a beat. "The real question is, how much will it cost us if we don't do it? We've already seen the backlash from just one incident. Imagine what happens if more stories like this come to light. We could lose millions in revenue, not to mention irreparable damage to our brand." The tension in the room was palpable. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, weighing the cost of change against the potential fallout of doing nothing. William Hartley sat back, his fingers steepled as he considered Amanda's proposal. "I see your point," he said slowly. "But we need to be careful. If we push too hard, too fast, We risk alienating not only our employees, but also our investors. We need to find a balance. Amanda took a deep breath. She knew this was her moment. There is no balance when it comes to doing what's right, she said firmly. Either we commit to making this company a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, or we accept that we are part of the problem. And I, for one, am not willing to accept that. There was a long silence. Then, one by one, the board members began to nod. Even Richard, though begrudgingly, seemed to see the writing on the wall. William finally spoke. "All right, let's put it to a vote." The vote was closer than Amanda would have liked, but in the end, her proposal passed by a narrow margin. As the board members filed out of the room, she could see the mixture of apprehension and begrudging respect in their eyes. She had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. After the meeting, Amanda returned to her office, her mind already racing with the next steps. She needed to ensure that her directives were implemented properly, that the audits were thorough, and that the training programs were effective. She also knew she needed to prepare for the inevitable backlash, both from within the company and from the outside. It didn't take long for the pushback to begin. Within hours of the meeting, whispers started circulating through the corporate grapevine. Some store managers, especially those with close ties to certain board members, were resistant to the changes. Rumors of retaliation against employees who spoke out were already surfacing. Amanda received a call from her assistant. "Miss Brown, I'm getting reports that some of the regional managers are saying they won't comply with the new policies. They're claiming it's overreach." Amanda sighed. "I expected as much," she said. "Start documenting everything. I want a paper trail of any resistance. We need to be ready to act." Robert, who had been sitting in on the call, nodded in agreement. "We need to keep up the pressure, Amanda. If we give them an inch, they'll take a mile." Amanda knew he was right. "Let's prepare a communication to all employees reiterating the new policies and the consequences for non-compliance. I also want to have a call with all regional managers tomorrow. It's time to set the record straight." The following day, Amanda convened a virtual meeting with the regional managers. The tension was evident from the start. Several of the managers looked visibly displeased. One of them, a man named Greg Turner, was the first to speak up. "Miss Brown," he began, his tone dripping with defiance, "I don't see why we're being forced into this. Our stores run just fine. We've got bigger things to worry about than some diversity training." Amanda's eyes narrowed. "Greg, the fact that you see this as just some diversity training is exactly why it's necessary. Our stores do not run just fine when customers are being profiled and treated unfairly. We have a responsibility to ensure that every person who walks through our doors feels welcome and respected." Another manager, Sarah Collins, chimed in, her expression more conciliatory. "Amanda, I agree that changes need to be made, but some of our employees are afraid that they're going to be punished for things they didn't even realize were wrong." Amanda nodded. "I understand that, Sarah, and that's why education is a key part of this process. But let me be clear. Ignorance is not an excuse for discriminatory behavior. We're not out for a witch hunt. We're here to make sure everyone is aware of what's expected and to hold accountable those who refuse to change." Greg muttered something under his breath, and Amanda's patience finally wore thin. "Greg, if you're not willing to implement these changes, you should consider your position here," she said sharply. "I'm not interested in managing people who aren't committed to the company's values. This is not optional." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda could see that her message had landed. The managers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others visibly fuming. But it was clear that Amanda was not backing down, and they had no choice but to fall in line, or face the consequences. That afternoon, Amanda received an anonymous email. It was brief, but alarming. Be careful. Not everyone wants you to succeed. Watch your back. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. She knew there would be resistance, but this felt more personal, more threatening. She forwarded the email to Robert and then called him immediately. "We need to be vigilant," she said. "There are people who are willing to go to great lengths to stop these changes." Robert's voice was calm but serious. "Agreed. I'll bring in some additional security measures for you and the team. And we'll keep documenting everything. Whoever's behind this, we'll find them." Amanda took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Let them try," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The pressure was mounting, and Amanda knew that she was walking a dangerous line. But she also knew that the fight was worth it. She was determined to create a safer, more inclusive environment for everyone, and she wasn't going to let threats or resistance stop her. The real battle had just begun. The days following the board meeting were filled with tension and uncertainty. Amanda had won the initial battle, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. Implementing the new policies and conducting the company-wide audit required more than just signatures on paper. It required real change in attitudes, behaviors, and a firm commitment from everyone involved. And there were already signs that not everyone was on board. Reports continued to surface about resistance from certain regional managers and store supervisors. Some were quietly sabotaging the training sessions, while others were spreading misinformation to stir up fear and resentment among the staff. Amanda knew she needed to act swiftly and decisively to counter these moves, or risk losing the momentum she had built. One afternoon, Amanda sat in her office, reviewing a detailed report of the first week's findings from the audits. Her assistant, Carla, had been working around the clock to compile the data from all the stores. "Miss Brown," Carla began hesitantly, "I think you should see this." Amanda looked up from her laptop, her expression serious. "What is it, Carla?" Carla handed her a thick folder, filled with pages of notes, screenshots of messages, and transcripts of recorded conversations. "These are the results from some of the regional managers' reviews," she said. "There's a lot of resistance. Some of them are flat out refusing to comply with the new training programs, and a few have even made threats against employees who participated in the audits." Amanda's eyes darkened as she flipped through the documents. She read the comments left by some of the managers. "This is a waste of time. We don't need this kind of nonsense here. If you value your job, keep your mouth shut." Each word was like a spark, igniting the anger simmering inside her. "Unbelievable," Amanda muttered. "They're trying to undermine everything we're doing." Carla nodded. "Yes, and I've also heard that some managers are planning to escalate their opposition by rallying other stores to refuse the training." Amanda set the folder down, her expression firm. "Then we need to escalate our response. They want a fight? They've got one." She picked up her phone and called Robert. "We need an emergency meeting with the board," she said, "and I want it today." A few hours later, Amanda and Robert stood in front of the board of directors, a tense energy buzzing in the room. The members had barely had time to digest the new information, and Amanda could tell by their expressions that some were already on edge. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Amanda began, her tone measured but urgent. "I've called this meeting because we have a serious problem. Despite the board's approval of the new policies and training programs, there is active resistance from several regional managers and store supervisors. They are not only refusing to comply, but are also threatening employees who are cooperating with the audits." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. William Hartley, the CEO, leaned forward, his face grave. "Are you certain about these allegations, Amanda?" he asked. Amanda nodded and held up the folder Carla had given her earlier. We have documented proof, screenshots, recorded conversations, and first-hand testimonies. Some managers have even gone so far as to organize against the new policies, creating an environment of fear and retaliation. Richard Cole, who had been one of Amanda's more vocal opponents during the last meeting, looked skeptical. "And what exactly do you want us to do, Amanda? Fire half our regional managers? That's going to create chaos." Amanda's gaze hardened. "What I want is for the company to take a firm stand against anyone who refuses to uphold our values. If that means firing managers who are more interested in maintaining their own power than in ensuring a fair and inclusive environment, then yes, that's exactly what we need to do." Elena Martinez spoke up, her voice filled with concern. "Amanda, I support your efforts, but we need to be careful. If we move too quickly or appear too harsh, we could face legal challenges from these employees. They might claim wrongful termination or retaliatory action." Amanda turned to Elena. "I understand your concerns, Elena, but we can't let fear of lawsuits paralyze us. We need to show our employees and our customers that we're serious about change. If we back down now, we'll lose all credibility." William Hartley leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "Amanda, what exactly do you propose we do?" Amanda took a deep breath, her resolve unwavering. "We implement a zero-tolerance policy for non-compliance with the new training programs. Anyone who refuses to participate or actively undermines the process will face immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination. We also need to offer protection for whistleblowers who report misconduct. No one should be afraid to speak up." Richard snorted. "And how do you plan to enforce that? You can't be everywhere at once." Amanda met his gaze without flinching. "We create a task force within the company to oversee the audits and the implementation of the new policies. This task force will have the authority to investigate any reports of non-compliance and take appropriate action." There was a long silence as the board members absorbed Amanda's words. William finally nodded. "All right, let's put it to a vote." The vote was tense, with a few members hesitating, but in the end, the majority sided with Amanda. She had the authority she needed to take action, but she knew this was only the beginning. That evening, Amanda and Robert gathered a small team of trusted allies, employees and managers who had shown unwavering support for her efforts. They met in a private room at a downtown hotel to discuss the formation of the task force and how to proceed with the next phase. "We need to move quickly," Amanda said, addressing the group. "The opposition is getting bolder, and if we don't act now, they'll only dig in deeper." A young manager named Jasmine, who had been one of the first to speak out against the discrimination she witnessed in her store, nodded. "I've heard some of them are planning to sabotage the next round of audits. We need to be ready for that." Robert leaned in. "We should start by sending out a clear message. Let everyone know that non-compliance will be met with immediate consequences. And we need to ensure that any employee who feels threatened has a direct line to us." Another ally, a senior HR representative named David, spoke up. "We should also consider bringing in external consultants to oversee some of the more contentious regions. It could add a layer of accountability that's harder for the resistors to ignore." Amanda agreed. "Good idea. We need to make it clear that this isn't just coming from me. It's coming from the company as a whole." The group continued to strategize late into the night, outlining a detailed plan to roll out the task force, monitor the stores, and protect employees who were willing to speak up. Amanda felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to prove that she could lead the company through this storm, but she also knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The next day, Amanda sent out a company-wide communication outlining the new zero-tolerance policy and the creation of the task force. The message was clear. There would be no room for discrimination, or for those who supported it. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, emails started pouring in, some supportive, others filled with anger and resentment. Amanda and her team began the daunting task of reviewing every complaint and every report of non-compliance. The task force was quickly assembled, with members dispatched to various regions to oversee the audits and monitor the training programs. The situation was tense. At several locations, managers who had been outspoken against the new policies were now openly challenging the task force representatives. At one store, a task force member reported that a group of employees, led by a resistant manager, had refused to attend a mandatory diversity training session. Instead, they had organized a meeting to discuss how to push back against Amanda's initiatives. Amanda was on a video call with Robert when she received the report. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "They're not just resisting. They're actively organizing against us." Robert's face was grim. "Then we need to make an example out of them. If we don't, others will think they can do the same." Amanda nodded. "I agree. Let's start with that store. I want the manager and anyone involved in this so-called meeting put on immediate leave pending investigation, and we'll replace them with interim managers from the task force." The decision sparked a firestorm. Within hours, messages started flooding in from employees both supporting and condemning Amanda's actions. Some praised her for taking a hard stance against discrimination, while others accused her of overreach and unfairly targeting longtime employees. As the backlash grew, Amanda found herself under increasing pressure. Her phone rang constantly, with calls from concerned board members, and her email inbox was overflowing with messages from both supporters and critics. She even received more anonymous threats, warning her to back off or face the consequences. One evening, as she was leaving the office late, Amanda's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you're untouchable, but you're not. Watch your back." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had faced threats before, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. She immediately called Robert. "We need to take this seriously," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her veins. "There are people who are willing to go to great lengths to protect the status quo," Robert agreed. "I'll contact security and make sure you're protected, and we'll keep digging. If someone's targeting you, we'll find out who." Amanda hung up, her mind racing. She knew she was facing not just a corporate battle, but a personal one as well. She had stepped into a minefield, and every move she made would be scrutinized, challenged, and potentially retaliated against. But she couldn't afford to back down now, not when she was so close to making real, lasting change. The following day, Amanda continued to receive reports of resistance and sabotage from various regions. But she also began receiving messages of support from employees who had felt silenced for too long. One email stood out to her. It was from a black employee at one of the most resistant stores. "Thank you for standing up for us. I've been working here for years, and this is the first time I've felt like someone truly has our backs." Amanda read the email again, feeling a surge of resolve. She was doing this for all the people who had been mistreated, overlooked, and marginalized. She was doing this because it was the right thing to do. As the days wore on, the tension continued to build. The company was at a crossroads, and Amanda knew that the decisions made in the coming weeks would determine its future. She braced herself for the battles ahead, knowing that the fight for justice was far from over. But she was ready for it. She had to be. The tension in the company had reached a boiling point. Amanda knew that the next few days would be critical in determining whether her efforts to change the corporate culture would succeed or crumble under the weight of resistance and internal sabotage. She had to remain vigilant, decisive, and unwavering in her commitment to creating an inclusive environment. The backlash against her new policies continued to intensify. Some regional managers and store supervisors feeling threatened by the changes, had become increasingly vocal in their opposition. Others, however, had started to see the writing on the wall and were cautiously aligning themselves with Amanda, recognizing that change was inevitable. Amanda's office became a hub of activity. Her team worked around the clock, fielding calls, responding to emails, and coordinating the task force's efforts to enforce the new zero-tolerance policy. Each day brought new challenges, and sometimes small victories. But today would be different. Today was the day Amanda would address the entire company directly. She had decided to hold a live-streamed town hall meeting to speak directly to all employees, from the highest executives to the newest hires. The goal was clear: reaffirm the company's commitment to change, outline the steps being taken, and make it unmistakably clear that there would be no tolerance for discrimination or defiance. Amanda stood in front of a large screen in a packed conference room. Cameras were set up around her, broadcasting to every store and office across the country. The board members were present as well, including William Hartley and Richard Cole, both of whom were watching her carefully. Some board members were wary of how this bold move would be received, but Amanda knew it was necessary. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The room quieted as she stepped up to the podium. "Good afternoon, everyone," Amanda began, her voice steady and strong. "Today I want to speak to you directly, not just as your leader, but as someone who cares deeply about the future of this company and every person who is a part of it." The room was silent, and the screen showed employees watching from various locations, their expressions a mix of curiosity, concern, and skepticism. "In the past few weeks, we've uncovered some difficult truths about our company's culture," Amanda continued. "We've seen that discrimination, prejudice, and a lack of accountability have been allowed to thrive in certain parts of our organization. This is unacceptable, and it ends now." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I understand that change can be difficult. It can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. I want to make it clear that we are committed to creating a workplace where everyone is treated with respect and dignity, where diversity is celebrated, not punished." She clicked a button on the remote, and a slide appeared on the screen behind her, outlining the new policies and the formation of the task force. "We have implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and non-compliance with our diversity and inclusion initiatives. This means that anyone who engages in discriminatory behavior or attempts to undermine these efforts will face consequences, up to and including termination." A murmur went through the room, and Amanda could see some of the board members shifting in their seats. She continued, "I also want to assure everyone that this is not a witch hunt. This is about creating a fair and inclusive environment where everyone feels valued. And that starts with education, accountability, and most importantly, action." She clicked to the next slide, showing testimonials from employees who had faced discrimination in the company. "For too long, some of you have felt silenced, marginalized, and mistreated. I want you to know that I hear you. We hear you. And we are taking steps to make sure that your voices are not just heard, but amplified." The atmosphere in the room began to shift. Some employees nodded, others looked thoughtful, and a few even seemed emotional. Amanda knew she was reaching them. "I know that some of you are afraid," she said, her voice softening. "Afraid of retaliation, afraid of speaking up, afraid of change. But I want to tell you that you don't have to be afraid. We are here to support you. We are here to stand with you." She looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady. "And to those who are resisting this change, who are actively trying to undermine our efforts, I say this: you are on the wrong side of history. You have a choice to make. Either get on board with these changes and help us build a better, more inclusive company, or you will be left behind." The room was silent for a moment, and then Elena Martinez began to clap. Slowly, others joined in, and soon the room erupted in applause. On the screen, Amanda could see employees in stores across the country clapping as well. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Amanda nodded, feeling a wave of relief mixed with determination. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for your support, your courage, and your commitment to making this company a better place. Together, we can do this." She stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding. She knew that this was just the beginning, but it was a crucial step in the right direction. After the town hall, Amanda returned to her office, where her phone was already ringing with calls from regional managers, store supervisors, and employees. Some were calling to express their support, while others had questions or concerns. She spent the next few hours fielding calls, answering questions, and reassuring those who were still hesitant. Her assistant, Carla, knocked on the door. "Miss Brown, I think you should see this," she said, holding a tablet. "There's been a response from some of the managers who were opposed to the changes." Amanda took the tablet and quickly scanned the screen. A group of managers had sent a joint email to the board, accusing Amanda of overstepping her authority and creating a hostile work environment. They were demanding an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about leadership. Amanda's jaw tightened. "They're not giving up, are they?" Carla shook her head. "It looks like they're trying to rally support to push back against you." Amanda nodded. "Schedule a meeting with them," she said. "I want to face them head on." The emergency meeting took place the next morning. Amanda entered the boardroom to find several regional managers and store supervisors already seated. Some looked defiant, others anxious. William Hartley and Richard Cole were present as well, their expressions unreadable. Amanda wasted no time. "I've seen your email," she said, her tone calm but firm. "And I understand that some of you feel that I'm overstepping my authority. So let's talk about it." Greg Turner, one of the most vocal opponents of Amanda's changes, spoke up. "Amanda, this isn't personal," he began, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But you're creating chaos. We have stores to run, employees to manage. This constant upheaval is bad for business." Amanda nodded. "I understand your concerns, Greg," she replied. "But what's bad for business is allowing discrimination to continue unchecked. What's bad for business is ignoring the voices of our employees and our customers who demand better." Another manager, Susan Barker, chimed in. "But some of these employees feel like they're walking on eggshells now. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. How are we supposed to create a positive work environment under those conditions?" Amanda took a deep breath. "Susan, creating a positive work environment doesn't mean avoiding accountability. It means fostering an environment where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. That won't happen if we continue to tolerate discriminatory behavior." Richard Cole, who had been watching the exchange closely, leaned forward. "Amanda, you've made your point, but some of these concerns are valid. We need to find a way to move forward without alienating half of our workforce." "Now." Amanda's eyes locked onto Richard's. "I'm not interested in alienating anyone, Richard. I'm interested in creating a company where everyone is treated with dignity. That's not negotiable." The room fell silent. Greg Turner shifted in his seat, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "So what do you want us to do?" he asked finally. Amanda leaned forward, her gaze steady. "I want you to lead. I want you to set an example for your employees. I want you to embrace these changes and help us build a better company. Or, if you can't do that, I want you to step aside." There was a long pause. Then, one by one, the managers began to nod. Some did so reluctantly, others more readily. They knew Amanda wasn't going to back down, and the tide was clearly turning in her favor. William Hartley cleared his throat. "All right. It sounds like we have a path forward. Amanda, You have the board's full support to continue with the implementation of these changes. And, to the rest of you, I expect full cooperation." The meeting ended on a more positive note than it had begun. Amanda felt a sense of accomplishment, but also knew that there was still much work to be done. She left the boardroom, her mind already racing with the next steps. Over the next few weeks, Amanda and her team worked tirelessly to roll out the new policies and training programs across the company. The task force continued its audits, and managers were held accountable for any signs of resistance or non-compliance. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift. Employees who had previously felt silenced or marginalized started to speak up, and those who had resisted began to realize that the old ways were no longer acceptable. One day, Amanda received an email from a store manager who had been one of her most vocal critics. The subject line read, "Thank you." She opened it and read, "Amanda, I'll admit, I was against these changes at first. I thought it was just corporate nonsense. But after seeing the impact it's had on my team, I realize I was wrong. My employees are happier, more engaged, and our sales have actually gone up. I'm sorry for resisting. Thank you for pushing us to be better." Amanda smiled, feeling a sense of validation. She forwarded the email to Robert and Carla with a simple message, "We're getting there." As the weeks turned into months, the company continued to evolve. There were still challenges, still moments of resistance, but the progress was undeniable. The board remained supportive, and Amanda's efforts began to attract positive attention from both the media and the public. The anonymous threats had ceased, and the company's reputation was on the rise. Customers were noticing the changes, and many were vocal about their appreciation for the company's new direction. Amanda knew that the fight for justice was never truly over, but she also knew that they had taken a significant step forward. She had stood her ground, faced the resistance head-on, and led the company through a difficult but necessary transformation. And, as she sat in her office, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, she felt a deep sense of pride. Not just in herself, but in everyone who had stood with her, who had fought for a better, fairer, more inclusive world. A new order had been established, and there was no going back.